Clearly, the reception to Stranger Things Season 5 isn't what the Duffer Brothers or Netflix wanted. Things are not going very well for them, as these scores for this series are now tanking. But of course, Hollywood is running damage control, saying that we are ists and phobes and we're review bombing it unfairly, even though that's just not the case. I have a few different things to show off, but before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, the second we dislike something and the second we rate it poorly, they claim review bombing that we are ists and phobes and nobody is being fair. And sure, I do think that the gay scene is a reason why the scores are tanking, but that's because it was acted so poorly, it was paced so poorly. Why is it that you felt that that was the best scene right before the end of the episode? We're not talking about just the end of a random season. This is the end of the show in its entirety. It just wasn't placed well. If it was even in episode 1, it would have been better placed, but it's just not a good scene in general. They went from having what I would consider a really good coming out scene with Robin and Steve in season 3 to a really abysmal one in season 5. And by the way, I think it's important to point out that season 3 wasn't review bombed over the gay scene. Most people were perfectly fine with it because it fit in well, it was acted well, it was written well. This one isn't. But there's more problems that we have than just this gay scene, but the media isn't going to say that because, of course, they want to push a narrative that we are ists and phobes and that we are being unfair because they constantly do this. They also had done it in part with Game of Thrones, saying fans are never going to be happy because George hasn't finished his work, and so they're, blaming him for the failure of the show, and they're trying to take out their anger on him because of Game of Thrones is destroyed. He'll face the consequences of his actions or lack thereof. It was just a terrible time to be a Game of Thrones fan, but the show just sucked. It ended in a really poor way, and it needed multiple more seasons to get to that point for it to make sense. But yes, the Hollywood media has now fallen back on its favorite shield yet again, and this time it's being deployed to protect one of Netflix's most valuable franchises. According to Variety, the backlash to Stranger Things Season 5 isn't about pacing, bloated storytelling, poor character prioritization, or a collapsing narrative. No, it is review bombing. This show just kind of sucks now. Dark on Netflix has always been 100 times better. I highly recommend you go and watch that if you have not before. But yeah, we are talking about main characters like Mike completely being sidelined. It would have been so much more emotionally impactful if Mike was in Holly's place and then you had the Max escape scene, if you had him falling from the sky and looking at Nancy and his friends trying to get to him. It would have been so much better. They've given Holly way too much screen time, and you also have characters like 11 not really mattering anymore. Yeah, you have this bloated storytelling. You have way too many characters. It just hasn't gone in the right direction. And I think that they're sort of panicking behind the scenes now. But it says season 5's audience score on Rotten Tomatoes dropped sharply into the mid 50% range within days of the second volume's release, officially landing the season in rotten territory. That's not a rounding error. That's not noise. That's a massive collapse compared to prior seasons, which routinely hovered in the high 80s and 90s with fans. On IMDb, the episode titled The Bridge, the one Variety insists was unfairly targeted, is now the lowest rated episode in the entire series. It sits far below the show's usual standards and stands out dramatically from every other episode this season. People watched The Bridge. They saw a world-ending plot grind to a halt so the show could deliver a lengthy, protected monologue that the creative team was clearly viewing as untouchable. They didn't like that decision, they felt the priorities were wrong, and they responded using the tools that were literally built for such a purpose. Calling that bad faith is insulting, and this is just what the media does. They do it in the video game industry, they do it in Hollywood, and none of this is going to change anytime soon. The journalists that exist in these spaces are tourists, and really, they are only there to shill for companies because without the access, they are no longer the media. The only reason why the varieties and the polygons and Kotakus and PC gamers exist still to this day is because they are given early access and they are given exclusive interviews and content. And without those few articles they are able to write, they will not exist anymore. These people will not have jobs. So, of course, they are going to shill for these companies tooth and nail. It says Variety frames the backlash as though viewers were shocked by Will Byers' feelings, despite the fact that the show has been telegraphing this aspect of the character for years. And yes, he, from episode 1, was a little bit of a special guy. And even Joyce admits that Lonnie believed that. This is not a shocker. The issue is, in part, the way that they wrote it and filmed it, and it just wasn't a good scene at all whatsoever. Again, the Robin one was much better if they just had it be Joyce and maybe Mike, or even the main squad, which was like Lucas and Dustin and Mike. I think that would have been perfectly fine. Even throw Max into the mix. But adding all these other characters, it just wasn't emotionally impactful. Like, why would Collie care? Why would Vicky care? These characters should not have been there. Do you really think Hopper cares about Will's sexuality? No, it's time to move on. The world is about to end. These worlds are going to collide, and we're sitting here talking about this. It just wasn't good. The issue isn't what was said, it's when it was said, how it was staged, and why it was elevated above everything else. This isn't even the first time a character has come out on the show, like I had mentioned. This wasn't character development woven naturally into the story. This was a narrative red carpet rolled out in the middle of an apocalypse with the expectation that the audience would suspend all criticism because of the subject matter. And when they didn't, the media immediately rushed in to explain why the audience was wrong. And the most revealing part of Variety's coverage isn't the data it cites, it's the conclusions it draws. The article goes out of its way to frame dissent as toxic, to lump frustrated viewers in with internet extremists, and to repeatedly imply that negative reactions must stem from moral failure rather than creative disappointment. This is the same playbook Hollywood has used for years. When critics and audiences diverge sharply, the audience must be corrected. Their voices must be contextualized, sanitized, and ultimately dismissed. But here's the inconvenient truth. Audiences are allowed to dislike things. They're allowed to feel alienated. They're allowed to say this wasn't good, even if the media wishes they wouldn't. And yes, of course, as I always say, Netflix is allowed to write every character in Stranger Things as a gay person, if that's really what they want to do. But that doesn't mean that we have to watch it. That doesn't mean that we have to like it. And we are allowed to voice our opinions on it. You could have something that is almost a 10 out of 10, and I will still criticize it if I feel something that is a part of it is wrong or slightly off. I think that it is so hilarious, though, to see the media constantly use the same play over and over and over. And then when we call them out on it, they freak out because they believe that they are always right. They believe that they are the experts and that we are just losers, we are bigots, and that we are wrong. But so often now, the critic scores and the user scores are wildly different, and then they attack us, but they never sit and take a look in the mirror and go, you know what? Were we wrong about this situation? Did we miss an element that the audience didn't? And maybe the audience is actually smarter. There's no humility, there's no honesty, because these people don't really actually care about entertainment. They care about making money off of it, which is so sad. As I always say, if tomorrow video games and movies were all 10 out of 10s, I would be the happiest person alive because I would still be able to just talk about them. I love video games and movies. I want them to be great, but at the same time, I think it is very important for these companies to constantly be called out on their anti-consumer practices, their attacks on their audiences, and just all of the missteps that they make. So yes, now of course, it's not fair criticisms that we are levying towards this show. Apparently, we are ists, we are phobes, and we are review bombing Stranger Things simply because of the gay scene, which just isn't true. But the media needs beats to push a narrative and run damage control for Netflix, and that is exactly what they are going to do, even if it makes them look totally and completely ridiculous. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this important and informative, make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I'll talk to you all again in the next video really soon.